please place the presenter's name at the beginning of your question to assist us in asking the question. Our first group of questions will go to Dr. Zhang. And this is the first question. Does the agency consider a proposed product with no AB rated products available, in other words, they're discontinuing the Orange Book, and no PSG as a complex generic and assign it CGT designation?
Thank you, Jeff, for question. It looks like there's a multiple component in it. I try to keep my answer brief. So designation of CGT criteria is different from how we designate or classify a product as a complex. For CGT, I think it's there's a guidance on it. It's mainly to determine how many drugs are currently active listed on the Orange Book, either as a RLD or a approved ANDA in the past. So if there's no more than one such product as active in the Orange Book, then that drug can be designated as CGT, but the applicant need to submit that request for FDA to make that determination. So that's CGT, but doesn't mean if you're CGT, you could be a complex product. Complex product is based on, as Caliope in one of her slides shows, based on whether it's complex API, dosage form, route of delivery, and whether it's a complex drug device combination and some other complexity. So those are two different designations. So this question probably maybe more appropriate to send a request for CGT rather than as a complex, unless they meet other criteria for complex products. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. And the next question is also for Dr. Zhang. Under what context would a generic company be required to conduct a device similarity assessment as a generic versus a reference device with FDA? When should the device assessment take place?
Oh, thank you for that question. I try to keep my answer brief because this session does not really talk about it. So FDA has a separate guidance talk about comparative analysis and also related comparative use human factor studies for a drug device combination product that intended to be submitted under an ANDA. So typically, if they only want to know, and there's the guidance layout very nicely, the process and the threshold analysis that FDA will conduct, and industry can use that as a guidance to determine what level of the study they may be needed depend on their device versus the RLD device. And if the question is mainly focused on the device question, we highly encourage the applicant to submit a control correspondence for their device evaluation. And also we highly encourage, it would be very good for them also to include the intended device to the FDA, so this way FDA can evaluate appropriate. However, because some drug device combination is a complex product, if they have other questions, for the drug development, in addition to the device question, presumably they may send a pre-ANDA meeting request during the product development process. We have other the workshops cover this topic, so we encourage the people who are interested in this topic sign up for other SBIA event, which will have more in-depth discussion about this topic. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one final question for Dr. Lee and Dr. Zhang in this round. If the RLD is withdrawn from the Orange Book, not for safety and efficacy reasons, and the RS is allocated as allocated by OB, so in that case, should the applicant need to submit a controlled correspondence for selection of an RS for the development of the generic product?
I think the short answer is no. If it's already been designated by the Orange Book, they can use that RS in the Orange Book. Of course, they need to check the Orange Book frequently, right before the submission, make sure that does not change. So that's the short answer. They do not need to send a control correspondence for that. Unless there's no RS being designated, they may want to.
Thank you for responding to those questions. The next group of questions goes to Dr. Sarago. And this is the first question. Are pre-sub meetings reserved for only complex products?
Thank you for asking that question. Um, Not necessarily. If a prospective applicant wants to submit a pre-submission meeting for a non-complex product, this may fall into the may grant category. However, the meeting would FDA would assess this, and the meeting would have to significantly improve the ANDA review efficiency. Also, the meeting package would still have to be complete, and the questions submitted in the meeting request would need to be appropriate for a pre-submission meeting request.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Dr. Sarago. Which OGD office is responsible for providing responses to inquiries related to RLD RS unavailability?
The decision for which office would be responsible for a meeting request would be based on the specific questions that a prospective applicant would submit in their meeting request and meeting package. So it would be more question-based.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a few more questions for Dr. Sarago. The next question, is there a limit on the number of pre-ANDA product development meetings that I can request?
Thank you for asking that question. There are no set limits. However, the expectation is that a prospective applicant would have new data or new questions or new studies to share with FDA. Otherwise, the best path forward would probably be submitting your questions in a controlled correspondence.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question, can I submit a clarification question with new information for discussion at the external meeting after receiving my preliminary response?
No, you may not submit any new questions or information after receiving your preliminary response letter. FDA will not answer new questions not included in your original meeting package or submitted in an information request.
Thank you for responding to that question. This is the last question for Dr. Sarago. What if I have additional clarifying questions after I receive my meeting minutes or written responses? What should I do?
If you have additional clarifying questions after you receive your meeting minutes or your written response letter, you should for those, you should submit a new control correspondence or a new meeting request. And keep in mind the answer that I provided earlier. There should be new data, new questions, and those should be specific for the actual clarifying questions that were submitted.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next group of questions is directed to Dr. Yuan, and here's the first question. Can an applicant request both a product development meeting and a pre-submission meeting? How would the scope of the two meetings differ as far as types?
Thank you for the question. So if I understand the question correctly, it's asking whether the applicant can submit a PDUF and a PSUB concurrently. So the short answer is no. So we would recommend the applicant
to submit the Presub meeting request after the PDAF meeting request has been closed. So in terms of the scope of the two types of meeting, the PDAF meeting is to discuss the complex development issues during the product development program, while the Presub meeting type is to provide an opportunity for the prospective and the applicants to discuss and explain the format and content of the ANDA submission.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Dr. Yuan. What could be the reason for such a low approval for non-complex drugs compared with the complex drugs?
So just to clarify, it's not for approval of the complex versus non-complex products. It's the granting rate for the meeting rate requests. So the reason is that for non-complex products meeting request, most of the questions can be addressed through the control correspondence pathway. So that's the main reason for a high rate for denial of the meeting request.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Dr. Yuan. Can you please elaborate on the information that less than or equal to 3 questions can be asked in a controlled correspondence? I was under the impression that only 1 question could be asked. Are there types of questions that can be asked together or other limitations on multiple questions in a controlled correspondence?
So actually in the guidance for, let me see. In the guidance for controlled correspondence related to generic drug development guidance for industry, there's more detail about the number of the questions could be asked. So in terms of what types of questions can be asked in a single controlled correspondence, for example, if you, it's mostly for related topics, like Q1, Q2, Q2 sameness assessment, or the inactive ingredients, topics like that.
Thank you for responding to that question. Another question for Dr. Yuan. When will be the optimal timing for submitting pre-ANDA product development meeting requests?
You can submit your product development meeting request at any time of your product development program. But before you submitting your meeting request, you may need to consider whether you have enough knowledge about your product to allow an in-depth discussion with the agency and to prepare a complete and adequate meeting package.
Thank you for responding to that question. I have one last final question for Dr. Yuan. The presentation recommends the prospective ANDA applicants submit the pre-submission meeting request approximately 6 months before submission of the ANDA. Does the FDA grant or deny decisions for pre-submission meeting requests based on the target timeline for the ANDA submission?
No. So FDA does not make grant deny decision for PSUBs based on the target timeline for the ANDA submission. So the timeline is recommendation for the applicants to consider if they plan to submit a PSUB. So the key reason behind the recommended timeline is that the applicant, optimally, the applicant should have all complex or high-risk issues for the product development already addressed through the other pathway. And if you anticipate to submit additional PDF or control correspondence to address the scientific issues, then it may not be a good time for you to submit the Presub meeting request.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next group of questions will be directed to Dr. Brown. Here's the first question. Would controlled correspondences be considered as a possible path for interacting with FDA ahead of a planned 505(b)(2) submission?
So no, we wouldn't recommend that you submit a control for a 505(b)(2). Your best approach for that is to approach the OND division where you plan on submitting your NDA and just request a pre-NDA meeting, and they would provide, responses to any of your questions based upon their current practice. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Dr. Brown. Is the controlled correspondence process only for drug product development related inquiries, or can a controlled correspondence related to a post-approval change inquiry be submitted?
So both. You could submit a specific product development issue, or you could submit a post-approval question. There is a kind of a hitch with this post-approval question, is that you can't refer to a specific application. You'd have to have it very, very general, and the specific topic isn't covered by an existing guidance on post-approval changes. But yes, you could submit both as long as you meet these two recommendations.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we have time for just one more question. The last question will go to Dr. Brown, and here it is. Does OPQ have standard answers written in a map for most common controlled correspondence questions?
So, I consider that funny because we do sometimes submit respond to the same control correspondence question in the same way, but no, we do not have a map on for common control questions. We do have some policy development activities that's going to address that, but I can tell you that we actively track questions and responses because we want to make sure that there is consistency between reviewers, between sub-offices, with our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question, and that is the end of our Q&A panel. I want to thank all of our panelists for answering numerous questions that came in. We'll now transition into our break time to return at 2:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.